Hadley, thank you for the introductory remarks. I love the Steamboat Institute as defenders of freedom and opportunity in the American dream. Of course, very aligned with my views on these subjects as well. I'll give a few quick opening remarks and then we'll move to the conversation maybe as quick as possible. But American general during the Korean War once said, the bad news is we're surrounded on all sides. The good news is we can attack in any direction. And that's a good summary of what energy policy is when I arrived in DC. Just so many things so far off base, hence great opportunity to make a ton of improvements. Let me just give two quick examples and then let's move into Q&A. But as everyone remembers hearing, at the end of the Biden administration, they did the so-called LNG pause. They're not going to permit any more export terminals. That was announced in January of 2024, and then they released a report in December of 2024 after the election, after they lost the election a month before President Trump was inaugurated. And of course, if anybody read that report, Jennifer Granholm's cover letter made it sound like it had strong conclusions, 30% rise in energy prices and bad for the climate. Of course, the report didn't say those things at all, but it was short and kind of a thin report. What I found out after I got here was they'd actually commissioned the report well more than a year before the dates you all heard about it, and they finished the report in October 2023, 4 months before they announced the LNG pause. And I found that report because it was here at the Department of Energy. That report showed increased natural gas exports from the United States would have a negligible impact on domestic gas prices, and in most scenarios, drive a small reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Exactly the conclusions they didn't want politically. They didn't want to follow the data. So they buried that report, and then 4 months later said they were going to conduct such a study, and then of course they just took subsets. Just the total abuse of power, the abuse of the scientific process to deliver an entirely un-American, un-pro-energy conclusion, which is that the U.S. shouldn't grow our gas exports, and that somehow these incremental changes in greenhouse gas emissions trumped U.S. sovereignty and the safety of our allies. That's the kind of nonsense that ruled the day when we arrived. So as you heard President Trump on Inauguration Day, we ended the pause on LNG export terminals. We've permitted the additional terminals to be built that have capacity almost equal to our current export capacity of natural gas. And of course, there's a lot under construction as well. We will see a doubling of United States exports of natural gas in the next 5 years from where we are today, and room for another doubling in 5 or 8 years after that, which would make natural gas the largest export from the United States. And it's the fastest growing source of energy. Over the last 14 years, if you look at the raw data, where is energy coming from globally? The fastest growing source of energy by a fair margin is natural gas. And of course, U.S. is the dominant player in that. We have a cost advantage. We are now the world's largest exporter. These are things that are good for America, good for our economy, good for our allies, good for our geopolitical situation. So those are the kind of things we're doing. I think we'll also talk about in the Q&A, you saw the climate report that we released from the Department of Energy a couple of weeks ago. To me, that dialogue has been so nonsensical. It's been sort of a cancel culture, Orwellian. You must be in alignment with the faith of the climate church or we shut you up. That's just not the way to deal with any issue. And so we published a report, 140-page report, 5 climate scientists, well-known, I'm sure all of them well-known to people at the Steamboat Institute, a very thoughtful, big-picture overview. National Environmental Defense Fund has sued us. I was on CNN to talk about the report, not a single question on climate change. I did a New York Times print interview yesterday from a national lab in Virginia, and that just complete lack of any knowledge in the New York Times climate change reporter is just the example of what's wrong. We have people that are passionately beating a drum that the world is ending because of climate change. They don't know anything about climate change. They don't really want to debate. but it's been working for them to just beat the drum and drown everyone else out. Now that we have the high ground, we have the ability to bring the dialogue. We're going to bring a real dialogue about climate change and energy. I think the facts there are compelling for a massive pivot, not just in the United States, but we want to try to bring this to the world as well. We got where we are today by pursuing freedom. Freedom enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. The road forward is human liberty and a massive expansion in the availability of affordable, reliable, secure energy. That's the road ahead. That's prosperity. And Hadley, I look forward to any questions from you or the audience. Thanks for everyone's attention, and thank you for being part of the Steamboat Institute and attending the event today.
Thank you, Secretary Wright. I'd also like to thank Bill Rutledge, Charlie McNeil, and Amy Oliver Cook for helping me brainstorm some themes for these questions. The first question is, how can the administration help maintain grid stability and security with new demands of AI, artificial energy? And how will the forced retirements of coal-powered plants impact affordable, reliable energy supply?
Oh, a power-packed question, Hadley. I love that. So quick numbers on that. Right now, it looks like over the next 5 years, and say we're a half a year into that, we need probably at least 100 gigawatts of additional firm generation capacity for AI and for the start of this big reshoring and manufacturing boom in our country. So where were things left when I arrived? You can look at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that is the main regulatory body over building new electricity, new power plants, interstate transmission of electricity and natural gas. In the FERC queue that was left to us by the previous administration, there was slated to be 100 gigawatts of retirement, mostly of coal, but also of natural gas power plants. And in the queue was 22 gigawatts of new firm generating capacity, all of it natural gas. So they were going to subtract 100, add 22 for a net subtraction of 78, where we need a net addition of at least 100. I mean, if Harris had won the election and we'd continued down that pathway, there is no chance the United States would be competitive with China in the artificial intelligence race. Artificial intelligence is a new energy-intensive manufacturing industry. It takes the highest form of energy, electricity, and turns it into intelligence. Simply an awesome opportunity to grow productivity in our country, to grow scientific discovery in our country, but also critical for national defense, which is why I've called artificial intelligence, I've called it Manhattan Project 2.0. During World War II, in 28 months, in the first and probably to date still most awesome group science endeavor, in 28 months, we finished the nuclear physics, did the engineering, the science, and the fabrication, material separation, and built atomic bombs to bring World War II to an earlier end, saving tens of thousands of American lives, putting America as the preeminent power in the post-war period, a simply fabulous effort. But what was key with the Manhattan Project was we couldn't get second. It wasn't a nice-to-have technology. It was to have technology, because Nazi Germany also had a development effort during the war for an atomic bomb. Imagine the world today. We can't imagine it if Germany had won World War II. Simply unacceptable. And in AI, the implications for national defense are so grave that United States trailing behind communist China in AI is a threat to our sovereignty. It's a threat to the future trajectory of the world. The United States must lead in AI. We should lead in AI. We have the best businesses, the best scientists. We have massive private capital. We should lead on this, but the biggest constraint on the growth of AI is the delivery, as in your question, of new electric generating capacity. So of course we have to stop shutting down coal plants. If you want to build a mountain, first you got to stop digging the hole. And then we're doing everything possible to reform the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and FERC so that we can build new capacity as fast as possible. Almost all the new additions of firm generating capacity in the next few years will be natural gas. It's just by far the cheapest, most scalable form of electricity generation we have today. It's also by far our biggest existing source of electricity. Nuclear's in second, coal's in third. but we got to stop closing coal plants. We got to build new natural gas plants, and we're doing everything possible to get us so that we're building nuclear plants also as soon as possible. And with American capitalism, with freedom and opportunity and getting the government out of the way, we can deliver on this, we must deliver on this, and we will deliver on this.
Thank you. Since you mentioned nuclear energy, my next question is about nuclear. The Trump administration's right to prioritize nuclear energy, but the reality is that permitting, siting, and construction take time. So critics of nuclear argue that the long lead time proves we should focus instead on wind and solar, which they claim are quicker to deploy. How do you respond to those critics, and what concrete steps is the Department of Energy taking to shorten the timeline for new nuclear facilities?
Another great question. So first of all, with nuclear, the key thing about nuclear is you get power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. So that's the power that people will buy. No one has ever signed up for, well, I want electricity, my kid's in an incubator, and I want that electricity when the sun's shining or when the wind's blowing. There's just no customer for that. Electricity must be there when it's needed. You have to meet demand at peak demand. And at peak demand, Inauguration Day here in Washington, D.C. was really cold. That was peak demand in PJM, 65 million people in the mid-Atlantic back here in this part of the country. I can't wait to get back to the Colorado part of the country. But for the next 3.5 years, I'm here. 65 million people at peak demand, which is what you have to design an electricity grid for. 44% of our electricity came from gas, 20% from coal, 22% from hydro. We even had oil power in there. We had 4% from oil. That means your grid's tight if you're burning oil to get electricity. And 3% of the total electricity came from wind, solar, and batteries, which means you needed the exact same grid you would need whether you had 0 wind, solar, or batteries. The problem of wind, solar, and batteries is you can build them, solar particularly quickly, and of course if the government pays you to build things, mandates that you must build them, of course they get built, but they're essentially just parasites on the rest of the grid. If you're not there at peak demand, you're just auxiliary. And what it means is when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, all those other assets, which are mostly gas, nuclear, coal, and hydro, those assets have to flex their output up and down as the sun comes out from behind a cloud, or the sun sets, or the wind blows, or the wind stops. So it makes other assets run less efficiently. You've got to build more transmission lines. Look, Germany and United Kingdom show where a wind, solar, heavy grid goes. It goes to tripling your electricity prices and deindustrializing your nations. Americans didn't sign up for that nonsense, which is why they elected President Trump, to bring common sense back to D.C. So the critique of nuclear, of course, is real in that the United States built over 100 nuclear reactors that were started between the mid-1950s and the mid-1970s, the very birth of nuclear energy in our country. We launched and completed a lot of them were completed after that time window, but they were all under construction. Over 100 nuclear reactors, supplying 20% of U.S. electricity in a rapid ramp up. Then we created the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the mid-1970s. Since it's been created, it has licensed and led to the completion of 2 nuclear reactors. We created a new regulatory body to make sure we were safe, and it just crushed our nuclear industry. So we've built very little for nuclear, just Vogtle 3 and 4, 2 additional reactors at an existing power plant is all we've added on our grid from nuclear in decades. So I'm a passionate free market guy, but I supported in the One Big Beautiful Bill keeping nuclear subsidies for construction that starts before 2032, because the government actively destroyed this industry. We need to help nudge and get that nuclear industry back up on its feet. We need to enrich uranium in the United States. Today, there is 0 uranium enriched in the United States on our soil by American companies. That's just nuts. We don't have fuel fabrication. We don't have the ability to manufacture the steel containment vessels. So we've got to stand nuclear up again. And so the critics are right there. We will see a lot of nuclear power plants under construction in the next 24 months. I'm very excited about that. But are they going to be ready and online to supply extra juice to this rapid ramp up for AI? No, they're going to be there for that second wave. The first wave is going to come from stopping the closure of coal plants, getting expanded output from our existing hydro, coal, and natural gas, and the construction of many, many new natural gas power plants. So it's going to be a race. It's going to be tight. I wish I wasn't starting in a deep hole, but I believe we can and will deliver on growing our grid capacity massively to meet the AI challenges. But it's a challenge. What do I worry about the most? The stability of our electric grid and keeping the lead in artificial intelligence. I start, and this whole administration starts, in a hole that's been dug for many years. It's not a great place to start, but I think we're going the right direction. Let me give one example of that. In May, soon after I was in power, there was a 1.5 gigawatt coal power plant in Southwest Michigan that was slated to be closed 15 years before the end of life of the plant. Just politicians in Michigan, this will sound familiar to Coloradans, thought it was fashionable to announce the closure of all their coal power plants. And they were going to close the Campbell plant, 1.5 gigawatts. And I had emergency authority to stop the closure of that plant. Oh, the New York Times trashed me, environmental groups, I'm dirty in the air and going to make electricity more expensive. This unneeded coal power plant. 2 days later, in MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operators, one of our tightest grids, had a blackout or had a brownout. Where would they have been without that 1.5 gigawatts? Though that plant, a large plant with 3 large units, has run at well over 60% utilization throughout the summer. That's higher than the average utilization of a power plant in our grid today. We're driving low utilization by putting a bunch of intermittent resources on the grid. But it just clearly showed that coal plant was critical to the stability of that grid to keep the lights on just today without all the new data centers built. So although our opponents say we're crazy, of course, we're just following the math and the numbers, and we're worried about only one special interest group, and that's the American citizens.
Hear, hear. During your remarks, Secretary, you mentioned the Department of Energy's study on climate change. So earlier this morning, when we started our conference, our CEO and chairman, Jennifer Schubert-Aiken, mentioned that we have hosted at the Steamboat Institute 10 debates on climate and energy issues over the past few years. We believe strongly in open, transparent, and fair dialogue about climate and related issues. Can you talk a little bit more about how this DOE study on climate change fits into the broader picture of having a fair and balanced and important debate about the future of climate policy in the United States, and what else the Trump administration is doing to bring that dialogue back?
Yeah, and I gotta thank Jennifer for her leadership on this issue, and Steamboat for the leadership on this issue. It sounds like common sense. If climate change is this giant threat, it's certainly politically become huge. Energy is the infrastructure for the world. That's clearly a topic that should be discussed and debated all the time, maybe more than any other topic. But precious little discussion in that debate has ever happened. In fact, Steamboat Institute probably held a third of all the events that have ever really discussed climate change seriously. That's one think tank, one free market think tank in Colorado. So we are out to change that and to get massively more of it, to follow in the wake of the Steamboat Institute on this issue. So yeah, I simply engaged 5 climate scientists who were thoughtful, who follow the data, who have different views and different opinions. Heck, Steve Koonin was Undersecretary for Science in the Obama administration. Judy Curry was the head of Earth Sciences and Climate Change at Georgia Tech. Canadian economist Ross McKittrick, and 2 great atmospheric scientists and sensor leaders from Alabama that run our most important satellite temperature monitoring network, are the 5 authors of the report. I got a congressional letter recently calling them fringe cranks. Do those sound like fringe cranks? And of course, this is from politicians, of course, that know nothing about climate change. And so what we're going to do is bring that dialogue and bring that discussion forward I'm very excited to do this. I'll be speaking at Climate Week in New York City next month. What I want to do is go to the heart of the beast, go to the people that are the most adamant that climate change is world ending, and engage in a dialogue with them. Now, as I've seen so far on CNN, at the New York Times, and with the National Environmental Defense Fund, or was it, I think it was Environmental Defense Fund, none of those are even prepared to engage in a climate dialogue and defense. I think that's fine too. Let's bring the debate to the other side. And if they're unprepared to engage in that dialogue, the public will see a lot in that. You know, our side of thoughtful people following data, understanding facts, understanding everything in life is about trade-offs. We're going to win that argument every which way. We've been, and Steamboat Institute has shown that, winning that argument every which way. But what we're going to have today is a broader audience to see that dialogue, to see that discussion. So it's going to take all of us that are able to participate and do that. But you will get tired of hearing me talk about climate change and energy and those trade-offs. And I think our opponents who really are passionate about climate change, not because they know anything about climate change, not because they want to incrementally reduce infrared radiation absorbing gases in the atmosphere, they're passionate about climate change because it gives them a license to have large government to control your life, to control my life, and to control everyone else's lives and economic decisions. That's just un-American. That's just top-down control. That the American Revolution and the story of our country is to throw off those chains and to set people free. But the people that are anti-freedom, climate change, that's their card to be anti-freedom. We're going to take that card away and bring freedom back.
Secretary Wright, do you have any closing comments for this crowd, freedom lovers at the Steamboat Institute, how we can help you and be a part of this energy revolution, bringing American energy freedom and abundance back?
So my biggest message is keep doing what you're doing. In that room, and I've been in that room, as you know, multiple times, in that room is people who not only believe in freedom, who are aligned with our ideas, but they're people that are taking that belief and pushing it forward. They're gathering together. They're engaging with their neighbors. They're writing letters to their congressmen. They're running for politics. They're becoming journalists and influential speakers like you, Hadley. The people in that room, that is the key battalion that's going to have us win the climate, energy, and freedom debate. So God bless everything you do in the room. You've been fighting where the other side on this issue has had the top of the hill and has been able to silence us. Not anymore. We have the top of the hill. We have the bully pulpit. So let's all work together, whether it's to our neighbors, editorials, debates, public forums. The Steamboat Institute, absolutely a leader in this. I'll leave with one last thought. One of the biggest influences in my life, particularly when I was young, growing up, is my older sister, Kim Wright Scott. She is in the audience. Give Kim a hug and love for me. She was a huge part of forming me what I am today. And my brother-in-law, John Scott, who's also in the room, I suggest that John open a tab tonight and that all of you drink aggressively and robustly, toasting American freedom on John's tab tonight. Those are my parting thoughts. God bless you all. Keep doing what you're doing and fighting for American freedom.